Hey there, welcome to another episode of my F101 series. I'm currently building an F101 fighter in Blender, and I periodically take a few minutes out of the project to talk about some aspect of the project that I think might be interesting to people. In this episode, I want to talk about lighting the instrument panel. So there are little lights on the instrument panel that light up and illuminate it. In a previous episode, I incorrectly identified these little fittings here as nuts or fasteners, because I thought they were part of the dashboard that held it together. They are in fact little lamps. This is what they look like. They screw into the front of the dashboard. And you can see that light shoots out from the side of these. And the way the dashboard is constructed is there's this outer metal sheet, and on the inside are the instruments, and then sandwiched between them is a piece of plexiglass. And then that radiating light that comes out of here shines through the plexiglass. And the result looks like this. So this is an actual photograph from the interior of an F101 with the instrument panel lit up. So you can see that we've got this rim light on the instruments, and we've also got a lot of the stenciling also gets backlit by the same process. So this is the effect we're going to try to recreate. Let's start by creating a tool that we can use to control the lights, turn them on and off. Let me turn on screencast keys. All right, and I'm just going to create a circle here. Scroll it down, and then just in edit mode, I'm just going to extract this in. Control B that to get me a couple of bevels. Go into individual mode, S2, make that bigger. Get rid of this face and this face. Scroll these down, shrink them down to 0. And then I'm just going to move those to the middle. All right, so it gives me this little circular widget that I can use. Now let me move that forward here. So it's kind of over the canopy or the cockpit like that. I want to apply rotation and scale to this. And if we look at our orientation, we can see that we want it to rotate on its y-axis. So we can just lock these, and then that'll just let it rotate that way. I also like to give my widgets a name that is on at all times. So we're going to call this, I'm going to hit F2, I'm going to call this cockpit lights. All right, so there's our widget. And I also want to add a constraint to this. So I'm going to add a rotation constraint, limit rotation. And I want it to only rotate on the y-axis from 0 to 100 degrees. So check all these, but this one I want to go from 0 to 100 because 0 being fully off, 100 being 100% on. And by going from 0 to 100 degrees, we can use the degrees as a percentage of how strong this is affecting things. Now you notice that I need to also add, if you look up here when I spin this, it goes past 100 degrees. In order to stop that from happening there, you just hit the Effect Transform button, and now it'll lock in. It won't go anywhere past 100. I can rotate it, but it stops at 100. And then one last thing we need to do for this is we need to make sure that it works on local space. We don't want it to be affected by the movement of the airplane, because this is going to eventually be parented to the airplane as the airplane flies around and rotates in space. We don't want that world rotation of the aircraft to affect this, so we want to make sure we have local space checked. I want to add some keyframes to this also, just to make testing a little bit easier. So here I am at frame 1. And I'm on 0 rotation, so I'm going to add a single keyframe there. And let's go to frame 50, and I'm going to rotate this 100 degrees, and then add another keyframe, insert a single keyframe there. And then I can just make my end 50. So now if we play our animation, our widget moves back and forth. And this just makes it easier to scrub through here when we're working with the drivers. We'll be able to affect the on-off switch without having to get out of the driver editor. And I'm going to start by creating the edge glow that goes around each of these instrument holes. And if you watched an earlier episode where I made this instrument panel, you'll remember that I had a bunch of edge loops inside here that helped control the curvature of this when the subdivision surface was on. So I'm going to repurpose these and just select this inner rim here. And then we're going to assign a material to that we can turn on and off. That'll be the glowy emission we're going to use for most of the lighting of these instruments. All right, so I've selected all of the edges or faces for each of my instruments that I want to have glowing. There's no glow on these cutouts here, these 3 cutouts, but all the other ones have glow on them. Let's go to materials, and I'm going to create a new material. I'm going to call it instrument glow. And let's make that a magenta in the viewport so we can see it nice and bright. And we're going to assign that to all the selected faces. So now if we go and we look at materials, you can see that little pink line there shows us that we have that material just on the inside edges there. All right. So let's build the shader for that little magenta bit there. I'm going to adjust my windows a bit. I have the shader window here. And this is the shader for the magenta piece. The cockpit piece is just a standard kind of shader you would see if you generated your textures using Mari or Substance Painter or something. We've got color, roughness, metallic, normals, height maps, all feeding into a PBR. So that's the basic shader for this, which is not the subject of this tutorial. But if you created your textures using any of the other software programs, you'd be familiar with that. For the instrument glow, we just have the default PBR, which we don't want, so I'm going to delete that. I'm going to add a emission shader. So shader, emission. And I'm just going to make this kind of that magenta color, and I'll make it a strength of like 40 so that it's fairly strong. We can take a look and see what that looks like. You can see that that's got that glow on there. Let me unisolate my stuff so it has something to reflect off of. All right, there we go. So you can see we're starting to get that rim glow. The next thing we need to do though is we need to make this interact with our rheostat or our switch. So to do that, I'm going to create 2 more shaders. I'm going to create a transparent shader, and I'm going to create a mix shader. And I'm just going to connect them, connect them like that. And you can see that if this factor is all the way to the left, then the effect is off. There's no glow. And if I slide my slider over, then the glow is completely on. So in order to control this value with this tool, I'm going to create a value node. So look for value. And we're going to use the output of this value, sorry about that, the output of this value to affect this. So to do that, we need to right-click on the, sorry, I have trouble clicking here, right-click and say Add Driver. That's going to turn this purple. And let's split this window again and make this the driver editor. And if I select all this stuff, we eventually drill down to our tool or to our value here. So what I've done is I've selected my dashboard, I selected the value node inside my editor, which has the driver on it, which eventually lets me get down to this, which is the driver information. So let me just bring this over here, and I'm going to click on the driver tab, and it's going to give us some stuff that's already preset up for us, and then we have to change some stuff. It already comes with a variable, and this is the value that's going to be returned. You can see it here, 0, which is 0 here. And then you can add other information to this to come up with some additional movement or controls or whatever. So in this case, we want to choose the transform channel, which is this little kind of parenthesis function X looking thing. And we want to use the eyedropper to choose the widget. So this widget is now going to feed information into this variable. We want to use the Y rotation of this widget to control our lighting. And we want to use the local space of this. Remember, not the world space, but the local space. You can see these values say 0. If we play our animation, our widget turns, but our values don't move. And what I found is that if you're using local space, this widget needs to be parented to something in order for the values to update properly. So with this widget selected, I'm going to shift select anything. In this case, I'm going to shift select the instrument panel, hit Control P. I'm going to parent it to object. And now if we look at these values in here, it's getting crowded. We can look at this one. You can see how now the values change as this widget turns. So we got the data flowing properly. But you might notice that this value isn't the 0 to 100 that we were looking at before. Remember when I set this up, I said I wanted to go from 0 degrees to 100 degrees. This is clearly not going that far. And that's because this is returning values in radians and not degrees. So if this scrolls along here, you can see the value being returned is 1.442, 1442. That's radians, but we want to convert that to degrees, which is easy enough because there's a function for that. And it's case sensitive, so degrees. So now you can see that this value changed here so that it matches the degree output. But we don't want our function to go from 0 to 100. We only want it to go from 0 to 1. So we just need to divide that by 100. And now you can see that as this progresses, it's going to cycle between 0 and 1 being full strength. So we go all the way to the end here at 50 frames when this is full 100 degrees. This value is 1. And now if we take the output of this, stick it in there, it's going to control our lights. So you can see our lights are fully on. And if we go back to the beginning of the animation, they're fully off. And if we go somewhere in the middle, they start to come on. There's not a lot of contrast right now, so it's kind of hard to see the effect of the glow. So what I want to do is I want to use this tool and this driver to affect the overall lighting in the scene so I can get a better idea of what the glow looks like. I'm going to start by clicking on my value. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say copy driver. And that's going to copy all this information and let me use it somewhere else. And if I go to my world settings here, you can see that I'm using a HDR scene to light up my environment. It goes to a background node, and I've got my background intensity set to 0.35. So I want to use this value, or the rotation of this, to change this from 0.35 to 0. So we're going to do something similar that we did with the shader. I'm going to add a mix shader. I'm going to duplicate this guy. Give it the same input, but 0. That's going to go down here. Going to get a value, just like we did with the other shader. But this time, since I already have the driver created, I can right click and I can say paste driver, and it's going to paste the same driver in there. And then I can use that to drive my lighting between this background intensity and this background intensity. So if I go forward to 50, you can see that everything gets dark. And let me turn on or turn off transparency so that the world gets dark there. So we can take a look at it. That's what it looks like with everything glowing right now. And if we go back to the beginning of our timeline when it's daylight, we got light in the scene, the dashboard's lit up, but then as we go forward, the scene gets darker and darker and darker until eventually at the end we're at full on value for our tool and our dashboard is lit up. Let's take a quick look at our reference material just to see how we're doing. So first, obviously, we're too magenta. This should be a redder color. And the other things, obviously, that are missing is our stenciling needs to be lit up. So that's not lit up yet. We haven't done that bit. And our needles also could use a little bit more highlighting. So let's do that next. Let's start with just fixing that magenta color. So if I select our dashboard where that color is, go back into our object shader, and let's just change that to be a little redder. I'm just kind of looking off to the right on my monitor, see if that seems to match a little better. That seems better. All right, so that's good. Next thing we need to do, though, is we need to get that stenciling, in, and the highlights on the needles. So let's do that next. So let's turn off the render to speed things up a bit. Bring this down. Now, when I created my when I painted this, I painted it using Substance Painter. You could use Mari or any other painting tool you want to. And I just did the standard principled shader kind of setup where we've got a normal channel, height channel, metallic, roughness, and then color. And they all go into a principled shader to generate the final color. But when I painted it in Substance Painter, I also created an emission channel so that every time I painted one of these stencils or anything else that needed to be highlighted, I duplicated that information and into another set of files for emission so that anything that's black is not going to have any emission, and anything that's white, white being a value of 1, is going to be emissive. So here you can see two associated channels, this being the color channel for part of the model, and this being the emission channel for part of the model. Let's move that out of the way. Just want to jump into the Substance Painter real quick, just to demonstrate what I was talking about. I've got my model here, and I want to just maybe paint a little stencil here on the corner that has emissions on it. So I want to create a paint layer to be painting in. I put all mine in, all my stenciling is inside the stencil layer, but for demonstration I just created this layer, layer 1 paint layer by clicking on this paintbrush. I want to add a resource to my project. I'm going to add resources, and you just navigate to where they are. And in a previous video I talked about how I created these files. These files are just alpha channels. They're PNGs with alpha channels on them, so this is all transparent. So when I paint, I'm only going to be painting the stuff with color on it. So I can click open on that. I'm going to call it a stencil. What you call it doesn't matter, it's just for your own reference. I'm going to make it an alpha channel, or I'm going to make it an alpha. I'm going to define it as an alpha as opposed to one of these other options. I'm going to put it in the current session because I'm not going to need it later on. When I close the file, I don't care if it goes away. And then I can import it. You can see it shows up here inside my library. Now I want to hit the 3 on the keypad, and that brings up my little stencil window here. And over here on the left, you can see I've got some channel options. Right now color is already selected, which is why this is here. If I click on that, that goes away. And that means I'm going to be painting color information. I want to click on the emission channel as well, so now I'm going to be painting in both of these simultaneously. And I can just drag this onto the color and drag it onto the emission. And now when I paint with the stencil, I'm going to be painting color and emission data simultaneously. And that's how I create those two maps that overlap. Now as far as manipulating the stencil, if I hold the S key down, it lets me do things to the stencil. So if I hold the S key down and right click, I can scale it. So I'm holding the right mouse button down and moving my mouse back and forth. If I hold the S key down and use my left mouse button and move my mouse, you can see I rotate my template. And if I hold the Shift key down while I do that, you can see it snaps 90 degrees, give you a nice straight line. And finally, if I hold the S key down and middle mouse, I can move my template around. And if I'm moving it around while I have my middle mouse button down, if I let go of the S key now, the screen gets light again and I can see better what I'm doing. But I'm just toggling now with the S key to make it go dark, letting go of the S key, and everything's lighter. So now I just want to place my stencil where I want it. Let's say I wanted it right here. I can make my paintbrush bigger or smaller by either using the bracket keys, or I can right click and control right click and drag my mouse. So I'm holding the control key down and I'm moving my mouse with my right button held down just to rescale the mouse button. And now if I just paint on here, you can see that I'm painting that stencil onto my model. And that's all there is to it. And then when you go to export, so you go to File, Export Textures, you just want to make sure that you have an emission set as part of your output files. And then just include it in the Blender file like I was talking about a few minutes ago when we're back in Blender. All right, so back to Blender. So let's begin that part by updating our instrument glow. I'm going to make this into, or at least some of this into, a group so that I can reuse that data for all of my shaders. Because I have, if you look at this down here, you can see each one of these colors, this blue, this kind of pink, and this green. These are 3 different sets of shaders that all need to share this information so that if I decide to change the strength or the color, I can easily do that just in one spot later if I group this stuff. So I want to group the value and the emission together. Make that a group, Control G. And I don't need that right now. So I'm also going to add in an input RGB, and I'm going to copy the value out of here just by hovering over this, hitting Control C, and then Control V. It's going to paste that color in there. So I can put it in here, but then I can also make it an output because I'm going to need that color later. So I've got 3 outputs here. I've got the value from our driver, the actual emission, the glow, and then there's the raw color of the glow without the emission strength information. Let's back out of that, and I'm just going to call this instrument glow. And that'll be our group. And just move that there. So now we can reuse this somewhere else. So let me pick part of the model here that's got some glowy stuff on it. So I know that there's some text on these panels here that glows. So it's part of the blue shader, which is the same one that's up there. And I'm going to go into my, I've got these things labeled as front cockpit B, A, B, C. The blue ones are the B's. Now let's go down here. I'm going to click on this. I have Node Wrangler enabled, so I can hit Control-Shift-D to duplicate. That's going to duplicate it, and it's going to leave that connection for me. So now instead of being the normal, I want to add a new. I want to change that file from the cockpit B normal to the cockpit B emissive. You see it right here. And I want to. I've got UDIM, so I want to select the first of the three. So I'll open that up. And it'll automatically detect that it's a UDIM. I want it to be a non-color because this is just a black and white image that we're going to use as a mask. Let me scroll out. And I just want to connect this with the PBR shader. So I'm going to add in our group. So Shift A, group, and then I'm going to use the instrument glow group that we created. And I want to connect the color of the group to the color of the emission. And I want to add a math node here. So I'm going to go to Converter and Math, make this multiply. And I'm going to take the color of the emission texture. Remember, it's black and white, so zeros and ones. Put it in here. So that if it's a black, it's going to be a 0, so it's going to multiply, it's going to be 0, so basically turn it off. If it's a white value, it's going to be 1, and it's going to come out as 1. And then I want to take the current strength, the value, and put it in here. So this way, when the widget is at 0 degrees, it's going to multiply as 0 times here, and a 0 is going to come out, and the lights are going to be off. When the widget turns towards 100 degrees, that value is going to become non-zero, and then the value coming out of this multiply node is going to be non-zero, and then that just gets put up into strength. So that when the widget is turned all the way at 100 degrees, it's going to be a value of 1 coming out of here. The white values in here are 1. We're going to have 1 times 1 is 1, and we're going to get an emission strength of 1. So if everything worked out okay, if I hit on this render button, you can see that our text is glowing. Right, that wasn't there before. And if I go back to the beginning of our timeline, you can see that the text is now just back to white again. So that seems to work okay. If we go somewhere in the middle, we should kind of get a mix where we got some dimming going on. A little bit of glow starting to happen. All right, it seems to be working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for the remainder of my textures. I'm just going to create this little bit of a network that I did here, where I include the emission mask, and then add this little multiply group node and attach it to the emission strength. Then I'll show you the final product when it's done. The animation's done. We'll take a look at that. And I think it looks pretty close to our reference material. Got that nice red glow on the rims, and our stencils are all lit up. I hope the tutorial was helpful for you. Good luck with your projects, and thanks for watching.